Okay, I'm gonna get started. There's a few people outside, but they'll catch up. So my name's Owen. I'm a co-captain of Alpine Robotics, and I've been in charge of the design of our Swerve modules for the past 2 years. As a team, we've been doing Swerve since 2014. We started designing our modules in 2012, and then first implemented in 2014, and have done them every year since, except 2016, of course. So when I've given this presentation in the past, I've kind of focused on a lot of small, nitpicky aspects, and I don't really think that's relevant because the individual aspects of each Swerve module often vary significantly based off of team's machining capabilities and the game and a lot of other aspects. So what I'm kind of going to try to do is give you an overview of what I would consider the hardest or most complicated parts of Swerve. And then I'm also going to give you a general idea of the mistakes to avoid and just some general suggestions, because there's a lot of places to go wrong when you're making a Swerve module. And then after that, I'm going to kind of walk you through the math. I'm not a programmer, so I can't talk about the nitpicks of the programming, but the math is actually surprisingly simple, so I can walk you through that. And then if you have any questions and details on programming, feel free to come to our pits. All of our programmers are going to be there, and you can ask them as many questions as you want. So to get started, I've kind of outlined what I would consider 5 considerations and kind of the 5 aspects of Swerve that really make it so different from other drivetrains. So first and probably foremost is the actual turreting of the wheels. So what allows this to rotate, and like how do you do that without getting wires in the way in a robust and simple way? And then how you're rotating it, like belts, gears, what kind of motor to use, ratio, all that stuff. And then turning motor, and then encoders, which are probably the most important aspect of Swerve. Swerve without encoders is basically just a frame on wheels. It's completely useless. And then bevel gears, which is something that you don't really see in many other types of drivetrains and have some little nitpicky aspects that are important to watch out for. So first, the actual turning of the wheel. What I mean by that is how this rotates like that. Like what allows that to happen. And so there are kind of 2 different methods that can that work. So either you have a bushing system like what I have demonstrated here, which is what we use, and what we've used it with 221 Systems Rev module, which is a COTS part that's no longer available, and then what we did this year, and then it's also something similar to what 2767 does. So essentially how this system works is you have these 3 layers, right? You have this purple thing, which attaches to this, and then you have this red part, which for us is we use an oil light bushing and a ring, this red layer, and then you have this blue part, which is fixed to the frame, and so then the purple part can rotate freely in the.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
We have lots of people standing. Could you do a favor and ask people to move in so that take all the empty seats up, so people are coming in to find a place to sit.
Can everyone move to the middle so that every single empty seat is taken up? There's a ton of people standing in the back, and we want to be able to minimize that. So if there's an empty seat next to you, slide into it, please. So there's a seat up here. I can't really see many. If there's an empty seat next to you, can you raise your hand? All right, there's like 1. So sorry for the people that have to stand. I was not expecting this many people. All right, so getting back to this bushing style approach. So yeah, essentially how it works is that purple part, it's just purple in our module, obviously not be purple in real life, is affixed to the lower half that where your wheel is and stuff, and then it rotates freely within the red part, which for us again is oil light. So this system has been very effective for us. The big thing about big aspect of Swerve is properly supporting your drive shaft, so it doesn't bend and doesn't get messed up when you get hit on the side. And so this system has worked super well for us. So you have the drive shaft goes through a bearing which is located at the top and then at the bottom, so that it secures it, and we've never had any issues with the drive shaft getting damaged, which a lot of teams I've talked to have. Last year we fell directly onto our Swerve module when our rope broke. In 2014, we had a team hit us so hard, one of our churro spacers ripped into a piece of 1/8 inch aluminum, and it didn't damage it. The drive shaft was damaged. So this system's been super robust for us, and that's, I think, one of the big advantages of it. it's a little bulky as compared to maybe like 1640 solution, but it's not that heavy and it's worked really well. In terms of machining capabilities, for Swerve, I'd say it's on the lower side, but that doesn't mean it's easy. We made ours this year on a Haas mini mill, which is we use it as a sponsor. It's obviously a very expensive piece of machine. We also made some on the lathe, which again is a decently expensive and complex machine, and it definitely does take time, but again, the system's worked really well for us. And then the oil light parts are just from Endumark, I believe. So then, again, this system is similar to 2767 system. So they don't have an oil light, so they have this outer white part, which is affixed to their frame. That's made of cast nylon. And then they have this inner aluminum part, which the shaft goes through. This is a much better way to see it, right? And then you have your bevel gear down here, and this is, it attaches up here and rotates. And then in terms of rotating the module, which I'll get more into later, they attach it down here. So yeah, as you can see, this white part attaches to the frame, and then the gray part is what spins. And again, it does take up a little more space and maybe a little heavier than some of the other systems I'll show you, but it's worked really well and it's very robust. I know at 1640 also, not 1640, 2767 is also said in the white paper. I believe this was the only part of the robot they needed to NC machine, and so, or only part of the Swerve model they needed to NC machine, so like I said, it's one of the more complex aspects. So then the other approach is kind of a bearing style approach. It's much more complicated, requires a lot of machining capabilities, but is probably a little more compact and lightweight. So essentially how this works is you have this this blue piece here, which has a groove in it, and then you have, and then it attaches there to this gray piece, and then I believe they use like nylon balls, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that. In it, and then that's what allows that to spin. So then this is the turning motor that's affixed to this shaft. This whole thing is like essentially one piece, right? That's all affixed, and then so that's what allows that. It spins like again. This acts essentially as a bearing, and it spins in that. And then you have the drive shaft runs through it, where it's supported in multiple different locations. Again, so they're supporting the drive shaft a lot. They are an excellent Swerve team. They know to do that, and they haven't had any issues with that. It's robust. This again is a little more lightweight, but it's very complicated. I know their Swerve modules involve welding and lots of NC machining and a lot of complex things that we don't do. And so in someone starting with stuff, I would generally avoid that, but it is an option. So then this is similar. This system is also kind of similar to 1533's approach, which is pretty unique, but it's a same general idea. So this gear is custom made, I believe, and then it has grooves in it, which then again, it acts as a giant bearing. So it rides there, balls in there, and then it rides in that gray piece. And so then it's turned by just directly driving it with that motor, and then the shaft. This system's kind of complex and difficult to describe without a full CAD, but so these parts go all the way up, and then have bearings in them, which is what on a shaft, and that's what drives that. Again, this is very complex and difficult to machine, but like their modules weigh I think like 6 pounds. They're incredibly lightweight, so that you do have definitely an advantage there. So this is a pretty complicated. All of these systems are kind of complicated and not that easy to describe. So does anyone have any questions? All right. At any point, if you have a question, just raise your hand, and I'm happy to answer it. Okay, so then, in terms of actually turning the module, I would generally recommend belts. From what we've seen, they slip the least, and they're the most accurate, and have the least backlash, which is the biggest thing. So, a common saying in Swerve is the hardest thing to do with Swerve is drive straight. And that's because if you have backlash in the turning, which we still do even with belts and with our experience, and I think almost all teams do, it means that you're not going to, even if your wheel thinks it's straight, it could still be 1 or 2 degrees off. And so we found that belts have the least backlash, and that's why we've used them. So I would recommend that. You definitely can do something like gears. We've seen chains have a lot of backlash, so I wouldn't recommend that, but not saying it's impossible. In terms of driving it, we've just used a bag motor on a 70-to-1 ratio for the past few years, which it worked really well for us. It's been really easy, and again, that's really all you need. If you can use an AM9015, you can use really any motor in that power range. You don't need a lot of power to turn your motor, and you don't need it to spin super fast, 100 to 200 RPM. That's plenty fast enough for your turning. Yeah, that's pretty much it. In terms of, so you'll see this. Yeah. Yeah, at the output. Yes. Just on that note, I would not recommend reducing it after you leave the gearbox if you're using an integrated encoder, because if you talk to almost all teams who have been doing Swerve for a while, they will say they're reading their turning encoder at 1-to-1 because it simplifies things a lot and just it makes your life a lot easier if you're reading it 1-to-1. I really strongly recommend that. So we don't do any reduction after it leaves the gearbox. So this, you'll see in here, these, the belts are mounted below and like directly to this aspect, to this thing. We have, in one of our older modules where we use the 2-to-1 systems, it's mounted above, for those of you who can see. It's the exact same idea, so it attaches to the, again, the innermost layer, which is attached to this in both systems. It just, in this, to the 2-to-1 system, systems version, it attaches at the top, and here it attaches at the bottom. It doesn't really matter. We just did this because we could make it a little more compact at the top, but again, up to you. So another huge aspect of Swerve is the encoders. They're the most important, like, without encoders, you don't have Swerve, plain and simple. The turning encoder is what allows your Swerve to work. If your turning encoder goes out, you're not driving for your match, essentially. Either your wheel's spinning crazily or it's stuck in some weird position, and you're essentially useless. So you need reliable turning encoders. We've found the integrated, the vector integrated encoders to be extremely reliable for us. We've used them for the past 2 years. They've never once failed unless they get unplugged, which hasn't really happened. It's super easy to integrate. It's really compact and it's really lightweight. So I would highly recommend that, just in terms of simplicity and ease. 1648 uses a different type of encoder. There are definitely other types of encoders that totally work, but from what our experience, the Verse Planetary encoder never fails and is extremely reliable, so I would recommend using those. Again, keep the encoder reading at a 1-to-1 ratio with real life, because that just makes your programming significantly easier and reduces potential errors there. So then you have drive encoders, which aren't exactly required, but unless you want to program autos based off time, which is definitely pretty risky, you're going to need your drive encoders. So this is something we've actually had a lot of issues with this year. So we initially were using the CTRE encoders with a custom. We would 3D print a part that went in between. One second. We 3D printed a part that allowed the encoder to go in between, this plate and the sim. And we found that when we would tighten it differently, the encoder would give us different values, so it really messed up a lot of autos. So we're actually also going to be using a Planetary integrated encoder for that. We're just using the sim. There's no reduction in the gearbox, it's just the encoder. And we're going to be implementing it here, but we've been testing on our practice robot, and it's been much more reliable. So actually, again, I would recommend the Verse Planetary integrated encoders just in terms of ease and simplicity. It is definitely not the most compact solution out there, and definitely not the lightest, but if you want something that's easy, that is. Yeah. I'm actually not sure. I'm not a programmer. I'm assuming someone here knows if they're analog or quadrature. Okay, quadrature, PWM. Yeah. Okay, so then another big aspect of almost all Swerve drives is how you use your bevel gear. So unless you're doing a system like the Bomb Squad with slip rings and the motor in the wheel, which for introductory Swerve, highly recommend avoiding that. It's extremely complex. We've never dabbled with slip rings. They're pretty risky, and I'm not saying they cannot be done well. Again, you definitely can, but it's really hard to do well. So the big thing with bevel gears is you need to use some sort of thrust washer or thrust sparing when you're using them, because it creates, since they're measuring at 90 degrees angle, right, it creates torque, which can mess up, if you aren't using a thrust washer, that messes everything up. So Okay, 2767 doesn't use a thrust washer, but that's because they mount their bevel gear directly. They screw it into the wheel, and that gives them, it's so securely there isn't really an issue with torque. But again, all the other teams I've looked at use thrust washer, thrust bearings because it prevents the torque, which is just a bad idea. So in terms of getting a good mesh, well, first, generally, if you're like designing a CAD and you're looking at a spreadsheet for a design sheet for the bevel gears, they're going to tell you how to mesh them from measuring from the back, like this area, to the center line of the gear at a 90-degree angle. And so I think, off the top of my head, I think for the Vex Pro, it's like 3/4 of an inch, but that's not that relevant. You can just find that on their website. So getting a good mesh is not always the easiest thing. What we found works is we get different thickness thrust washers, they just like vary slightly, and we'll put it together and just see how they mesh. And if isn't good, we'll just change around the thickness of the spacers and thrust washers until we get a good mesh. That systems have worked extremely well for us this year, and we haven't had any issues with them wearing and anything like that. And it's been working perfectly. So I would recommend a system like that. I believe. I know other teams have much more complex systems in which they like move the drive shaft and do a lot of complicated things that are pretty difficult and require a lot of resources. Again, adjusting the thickness of your thrust washer takes a few seconds and is really easy to do. So again, in terms of simplicity and for an introductory course, I would recommend doing something like that. All right, so now I'm just going to show you a few final designs and kind of just comment on different aspects. So I kind of didn't talk about a lot of aspects of these designs because honestly, like, it's up to you. So like, if you want to use two wheels, you want to use one wheel. If you want to have an idler gear if you want to have a gear, do you want to directly drive it, like what 2767 does it's up to you, and it's up to the game. I'm not going to say one is better. I'm not going to say even one is easier to do. It's really your choice. Like, again, what kind of wheel you want to use. If you want to use a live or dead axle, you can use chains in here. That's totally another option. If you want to drive with a belt instead, all of it is totally up to you. I don't really think I can be up here and say, oh, definitely do this system because it's so much better. We haven't, in a lot of areas, we just haven't seen that. So these two modules, this is ours this year, and then 2767's, I believe, from last year. They look very different, but are fundamentally pretty much the exact same. So you have you have first the turning motor mounted right above the module, and the belt pulley mounted right over the module in both, and then you have a turning motor driving it. Exact same thing. Then they have a belt-driven drive shaft. We have a gear-driven drive shaft. They're fundamentally the same. When you're coming down to your final design, honestly, just open SolidWorks, whatever you use, and just play around with the layout. See, like this. So in 2017, we wanted a module that was really low, that was not tall at all, because we wanted to have a big area to hold balls. So we made it so everything was pointed down. This year we wanted to go as light and as just generally compact as possible, so everything's pointed up, and that made it a lot more compact. It really is just totally up to you, and you can design it however you want. Again, like, these two modules require very similar machining resources and fundamentally are quite similar, but they look totally different. And then same idea here. This is a little more extreme example. 1640's module from a few years back, they do CVT now. And then 1533's module from I'm not sure when. They use the same general system where they don't use the bushings. They have the large bearing here, right there, and then right there. But again, they look very different, but fundamentally they're pretty similar. So in terms of design, what I would just generally recommend is start with, I call it the Rev module because we bought this car supply. Start with this golden thing, the Rev module, right? And figure out a design of that you like, because that you can keep year to year and won't really change unless you want to change the ratio in it, which takes 10 seconds, or you want to change the gear size, that takes 15, not the gear size, the wheel size, that takes 15 minutes. It's just get a fundamental design for that really solid, and test it and machine it, and then from there, you can do this upper half in whatever orientation you want. If you want to build it into a sheet metal frame, build it into a sheet metal frame. If you want to make it totally separate, make it totally separate. If you want to just it's beyond that, it's up to you, but having a solid rev module-esque thing designed and machined that you know works year after year allows you to focus on the other aspects, making it more compact in different ways when come build season. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some other general tips and then also a lot of mistakes because, like I said, Swerve is a total minefield for mistakes. There are so many things we've done wrong and I've seen other teams do wrong that really just make Swerve a total pain. Okay, so the first one is patience, and this probably sounds sort of stupid, but I think Swerve, more than almost anything else in FAC, requires an incredible amount of time. Like I said, we started being interested in Swerve after we were crossed from the 1717 in 2012. We didn't even do Swerve in competition season until 2014. We spent 2 years building our Swerve modules. I'm not saying you need to spend 2 years building Swerve modules, but because back then there was a lot less resources, a lot less teams published their code. I don't even think Vex Pro sold gears back then, so it was a lot harder. But take time, because if you don't, you're going to end up with a bad module, to put it simply, or bad code. Something's going to go wrong. I'd recommend having at least, if you machine 2 modules, you can put it on a frame with 2 mechanism wheels, and you can drive it around. So that gives you a chance to test your code, and that gives you a chance to test your modules. Run them for hours and hours, see how they wear. Slam them into it with other robots, see if they break. Drop it, see what happens to it. Just stress test it out, and then once you're confident in that, you have a solid design down, then you know you can go into build season comfortable. You don't even have to touch the design. You can just go into build season and machine it, and you're done. Same exact idea with code. Run your code repeatedly. Test it, make sure you have everything good. If you're making significant changes, then do that during the off season. Last year, we tried to make significant changes to our code during the build season, and it did not end well. We had issues driving for a good part of the competition because we made significant changes. So we then made those changes in the off season this year and tested them, and it worked perfectly. So again, just be patient, take your time, and you probably won't have any issues. But if you don't, I can almost guarantee you will. We've had many teams email us frantically saying, we can't get our code to work and we have a competition in 5 days. That's not what you want with Swerve. Okay, this is another big thing that a lot of teams miss out on, is supporting your drive. Yeah.
Quick question about patience. How many people did you have working between 2012 and 2014 on the Swerve drive?
I'm not too sure. I think probably 4 or 5 kids. Like I've been in charge of, like I said, I've really taken the lead. I designed these 2 modules, but then in the past we've had mentors do stuff, we've had kids do stuff. It's been a handful of kids who've been just like really involved in the team. Yeah, so but especially having 1 kid or 1 mentor who's really directly involved also helps, because they can, or a mentor and then a kid, they can pass that knowledge on and they can build on what they learn. Like I know, as soon as off season starts, I'm going to be redesigning this module for next year, and that's just like having that ability really allows you to perfect your module and allows it to become really good. Okay, so the other thing is really supporting your drive shaft well. I've actually had teams come up to me at a competition saying, yeah, we tried to do Swerve, then we got hit on the side, our drive shaft bent, now we have mechanism. That actually happened to me. So if you don't properly support your drive shaft, then it's just going to bend when you get hit. To put it simply. So what I mean by that is make sure it's going through 2 bearings, and make sure if there's gonna be torque on it, that the torque is evenly distributed, and it's just it's really securely mounted. So again, if you look at how we're mounting ours, so the drive shaft is running through here, right? So if we get hit on the side, it's this plate. So it's running through 3 bearings, and then this is a, I think we use 10th inch aluminum, right? So that's all taking the blunt of the force, where it's like, so I pulled up a design I found on Chief Delphi a while ago. I just saw this, and so here, if you were to hit this, the drive shaft is essentially just going straight through here, and there's nothing supporting it, and so if you were to hit that on the side, it would bend, it just wouldn't work. And then here's another example of a different issue. So if you're using bevel gears, which like I said you probably will be, it's not going to really, if that shaft isn't supported, what'll happen here is one of these will just push the other and they'll get out of mesh and they'll damage each other and you just won't run smoothly. So again, you need, if you're properly supporting that, you won't have that issue. Any questions? All right, so then another thing, what we've found, and again, in no way is this the only option, is that hex is just makes things simpler, a lot simpler. So we switched to essentially entirely hex this year, and it made assembly really fast, and it made just putting everything together easier. Not having to do with keys all the time is really nice. Not having to do with set screws is really nice. All of that, it's just, again, it might not be the super compact that you see on some other teams, but again, like trying to get a basic Swerve module, doing hex is just another way to make your life easier, and so you can focus. You don't have to deal with like finding a key and using 3 different types of gears and lots of different complex things, because you're not. If you just use all hex again, your life will be easier, basically. Okay, and then another thing a lot of teams will do is you'll kind of see them try to rush to get a module as light as possible, and goes back to supporting the drive shaft and just general robustness. I think Swerve is really easy to do in a way that is not robust, a lot more than other drivetrains. It's not hard to design a Swerve module that breaks easily, and a lot of teams will do that in trying to get their module lighter, but that's useless. If you don't have a robust module, there's no point in doing it. Again, it's just going to break all the time, and it's just going to be difficult. So don't make it robust first, make it a little lighter, and then test it. Again, don't make any significant changes, like fundamental changes, without testing it, because again, if you're not testing it and you're not sure that it's robust, it just won't work. So many teams have failed doing Swerves because they rush into things and it's not robust or something else goes wrong. And then this is kind of an odd one, but thread, again, more than the drivetrain, screws really like to come loose in Swerve. So when we put together our practice modules this year, the ones going on a practice spot, we didn't Loctite them. I don't remember why. It was a mistake. We ran our robot for about 2 hours and had like half of the screws come out in one of the modules in 2 hours because we didn't use Loctite. We used Loctite on our game robot, and we've had exactly 0 screws come loose the entire time. So basically every single screw you possibly can, put Loctite in. It makes your life so much easier, and without it, your module will probably literally vibrate itself apart. Okay, so now I'm going to do a brief overview of the math. Like I said before, I'm not a programmer, so I can't comment on the in-depth aspects of the programming of it, but the math is really basic and really straightforward. Yeah, essentially how it works is you're adding strafe and rotating vectors, and that's what allows everything else to happen. So for strafing, you just read your X and Y value from a joystick, use your arctan function, and then that's the angle you pointing your wheels at. That's it. The only thing is if your arctan will give the same value, because it's positive in 2 quadrants, right? So I know like in LabVIEW there's the arctan2 function that takes into account if it's positive or negative. And so just keep into account quadrants, but other than that, it's really easy. Again, just arctan with your X and Y vectors from your joystick, and that's your angle for strafing. That's it. So then it gets a little more complex with field-centric strafing, but not really. You basically just add or subtract your gyro angle. So if you've rotated 90 degrees, you add 90 degrees to the value, the initial value, and that's it. You're done. That's how you strafe field-centrically. Again, the math is super easy. So then rotating, you just point each wheels so that they're perpendicular with this vector. So initially you think, oh, isn't every wheel just at 45 degrees? And yes, if you have a square robot. But if you don't have a square robot, it's not exactly 45 degrees. So you just do some basic trig and find out what angle is perpendicular to this vector, and that's what you put it at for rotating. You put all the wheels at their respective angles, and that's it. You're rotating. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, well, to combine those, it must be really, oh, wait, not that yet. Okay, so the other thing with rotating is going the shortest possible way. So when you're rotating, you have essentially 2 possible options, right? You can just rotate directly to the angle, or you can reverse the direction of the wheel and then rotate. And so in order to find out which one's faster, what we do is we literally just look at how far we'd have to rotate in its current state. Then we add 180 degrees, which is the equivalent to flipping the direction of the wheel, and look if that's closer. If it's closer, we do that. If it's not, we just keep it in its current state and rotate it. And then you just compare them, you take the closest one out. Again, that's all you have to do. It's pretty simple. Any questions? All right. Okay, so then to put all this together, it's, again, not at all hard. You're simply just adding the x and y vectors from each, using Pythagorean theorem, and then that's it. You have full control of your robot. You can drive and you can rotate at the same time. All you have to do. So that's actually, that is all I have. And so I'm assuming if you want to ask me specific design questions, now is the time to do so. You can also come up and look at our modules. So yeah, anyone have any questions? Oh yeah, sure. And then, okay, so my contact information is also up there. And then Caitlin, who is going to be presenting with me but is unable to, who is a programmer, her email is also up there. I'll leave that up for a bit so people can get stuff. Yeah, question? Or, yeah. On the Swerve drive? Yeah, so if you look at like what we did last year, so everything is oriented down, and that does require the use of an idler gear in the drivetrain, but it did keep everything pretty compact. Yeah, someone else had a question here? Oh yeah. Questions? Is there anything anyone wants me to cover in more detail? Because I'm happy to. We have plenty of time. Oh yeah. Oil. Okay, so it's brass, I believe, embedded with oil. Yeah. So and they're like basically permanently slippery. We get them on Andy Mark, I believe, or I think McMaster. Yeah. It's just an oil light ring and a bushing. Yep. Oh, it's just a gear that goes in between your motor and the drive shaft that just acts essentially because you need to cover more distance. Yep. Probably within 3 days of kickoff. I've never done FTC. So, in all honesty, I can't really comment on that. I've seen Vex Swerve. I'm sorry. I don't know really anything about FTC. Yeah. LabVIEW. We're one of the only Swerve teams who programs in LabVIEW. So our code's all available online, and so feel free to take a look at it. We're also we've made some changes during build season that we'll update it with. There are most teams program in Java or Python or Swerve because that's a lot easier in all honesty. Any other questions? Also, feel free to, I have 2 of our Swerve modules. Feel free to come up and look at them more in depth, and you can ask me questions.